The cries were too soft for most ears to notice, but in the quiet meadow at the edge of the forest, they pierced the stillness like a whispered scream. A small, trembling bobcat cub, no larger than a human hand, struggled to lift its head. Its fur was damp, its breath shallow, and its cries came in weak, broken pulses. Beside it, the mother bobcat lay on her side, motionless, her golden eyes half closed and glassy, as if trapped between worlds. Blood matted her fur around her belly. The grass beneath her already darkened with the effort of bringing life into a world so cruel. The wind moved slowly through the trees. The sky above was soft and blue, but there was no peace here. Only the quiet weight of nature, watching, waiting, and then movement. From the tree line, two gray shapes emerged, silent and steady. Wolves. Their bodies moved with grace that only predators owned. Powerful shoulders, lean frames, heads lowered, not in attack, but in something more uncertain. Caution, hunger, curiosity. One walked slightly ahead of the other, eyes fixed on the cub's tiny body, now squirming against its mother's belly, searching blindly for warmth she could no longer give. The wolves did not charge. They did not growl. They simply walked forward, slow and deliberate, like shadows slipping across the grass. They didn't know they were being watched. A hawk circled overhead, its wings stretched wide, casting a shifting shadow over the scene. It, too, was a part of the silence, nature's audience to a moment of unbearable tension. The cub's cries grew sharper. Maybe it felt the tremor of the earth beneath the wolves' footsteps. Maybe instinct told it that something was coming. But the mother did not move. Her side barely lifted with each breath. Her paw twitched once, then fell still. 10 steps away now. The lead wolf lowered its head closer to the ground, ears angled back, not in aggression, but listening, watching, smelling. And then, without warning, the second wolf broke off, circling slowly to the side, flanking the mother's body. The cub, blind to the world, lifted its tiny head once more, and fell over from the effort. It gave out a soft, pitiful bleat that didn't sound like it belonged to a predator. It sounded like a question, a plea. That's when the lead wolf did something unexpected. It didn't snatch. It didn't lunge. It reached out, slow and deliberate, and gently grasped the cub by the scruff of its neck. The little bobcat went still. The wolf lifted the newborn in its jaws, carefully, like it had done this before, like it knew how to carry something breakable. Then it turned and began walking away from the body of the mother bobcat. The second wolf didn't follow. It stood there beside the mother, ears twitching, head tilted, as if waiting for a sign, as if mourning in silence. Back at the edge of the trees, the first wolf disappeared into the shadows with the cub in its mouth. In that moment, the meadow held its breath. Was this mercy, or was this the beginning of something far more brutal? The forest doesn't answer questions. It just moves forward. Hours passed. The sun shifted. The light turned golden. The body of the mother bobcat still lay in the same place, untouched. But tracks surrounded her now. Paw prints, light and careful, not the markings of violence, but of something quieter, something strange. And deep in the woods, in the shadowed hollow of a fallen tree, the wolf who had taken the cub lay curled, her breath steady and calm. The cub was tucked against her belly, between her forelegs. She licked its damp fur once, twice, and the cub, fragile and confused, did not resist. It simply breathed. Somewhere in the forest, a line had blurred, predator and prey, enemy and protector. The rules had shifted without warning. The second wolf appeared at the edge of the hollow and paused, watching the mother with the cub. There was no growling, no snarling, just the faintest nod, a shared understanding. But nature is not without its watchers. A crow on a branch, a fox in the distance, and far beyond the trees, the rising sound of tires on gravel, something mechanical, human. The forest was not as quiet as it had been. And whatever had just begun in the shadows of those trees, it was not over, not even close. The sun filtered through the leaves like soft gold, laying warm patterns across the mossy ground where the wolves had settled. In the quiet shade beneath the collapsed tree trunk, the cub lay nestled between thick fur and the steady pulse of breath that wasn't its mother's, but felt close enough. The larger wolf, the one who had lifted it from the meadow, now licked the cub's ear gently, not like a predator with prey, more like a guardian unsure of the rules she'd just broken. She had not given birth. She had not been meant to nurse. Yet something unspoken had stirred the moment her eyes met that helpless blur of fur and sound. It wasn't instinct, not the kind driven by hunger or territory. It was something older, buried deep in the marrow, something that whispered, protected. The other wolf, who had stood beside the mother bobcat's body in the clearing, returned without sound. He stepped over roots and scattered leaves, approaching with the same quiet tension. He paused near the edge of the hollow, his golden eyes watching the tiny life curled in a companion's arms. The she-wolf didn't look up. She didn't need to. He wasn't there to challenge her. He was there to witness. The cub stirred. Its breathing had steadied, though its limbs still trembled occasionally in the cold air. The she-wolf shifted slightly, curling around it, shielding the tiny body from the open wind. Every so often, her nose brushed against its side, checking, adjusting, listening to the silent music of life trying to stay. Elsewhere in the forest, the world went on. A woodpecker hammered against a dying tree. A deer stepped carefully through a stream. A storm cloud loomed faintly in the far-off sky, its edges soft and slow-moving. But inside the small hollow, time moved differently. It slowed to the rhythm of heartbeats and shallow breaths. The bond forming here wasn't visible, but it was growing. The male wolf circled once, then lay down facing the hollow's opening. His body blocked the wind. His eyes stayed alert, always scanning the woods. He didn't touch the cub, but he didn't leave, either. He was a sentinel, the quiet line between safety and intrusion. Back in the meadow, the mother bobcat's body still rested beneath the wide sky. Her fur had dried in the sun, the soft breeze carrying her scent outward. It called to scavengers, to foxes, to buzzards, but none had approached. Not yet, because just beyond the clearing, something larger had taken up position. A mountain lion had come down from the ridge. Drawn by the same scent, the big cat moved with practiced silence. Its body was lean, hungry. Its steps were wide and slow. It didn't want the body. It wanted what had once cried beside it. The cub, the mountain lion, pressed its nose to the blood-stained grass, scanning the earth with narrowed eyes. The wolf tracks were everywhere, disturbing the scene, confusing it. But the trail was there, faint and winding, leading into the woods toward the fallen tree. And it followed. Back in the hollow, the she-wolf stiffened. Her ears tilted, her eyes lifted. She didn't growl. She didn't move. She listened. A branch snapped far off in the trees. A low wind swept through the hollow. The cub whimpered faintly and curled tighter into her belly. The male wolf's eyes narrowed. He didn't look back. He already knew what she had heard. The forest was changing again. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It was walking toward them. By the time the mountain lion reached the outer edge of their territory, the scent of wolf was heavy, sharp, unmistakable. The big cat stopped beneath a pine tree, crouching low, scanning the gaps between branches. The hollow wasn't visible, but it was close, very close. Inside, the she-wolf finally rose. She stepped forward, slowly, gently detaching herself from the cub, who let out a faint cry as the warmth disappeared. She pressed her nose once to its head, then stepped beyond the hollow's edge, for bristling only slightly movements calm but ready. The male followed. They didn't call to each other. They didn't howl. But the air between them thrummed with understanding. This wasn't a fight over food. This was something else. The mountain lion crept closer. Low, silent, its eyes locked on movement it couldn't yet name. The wolves stood still, shadows against a sea of green. And then, with no warning, the male lunged forward, fast and direct. Not to attack, but to draw attention. The lion snarled, swerved, and turned to follow the charging wolf deeper into the woods. The female didn't move. She stood her ground beside the hollow, heart racing, ears flicking back toward the cub's cries. She didn't know if her companion would return, but she knew why he ran. Back in the fallen tree, the cub cried louder now, its tiny voice breaking through the silence. The forest didn't respond. It simply held its breath again. As the sun dipped low and the light grew thin, the she-wolf lay back down and drew the cub close once more. Outside, the wind picked up, and somewhere in the trees, far from the hollow, the sound of struggle echoed once, then vanished. The male hadn't returned. Not yet. But in the cub's shallow breathing and the soft warmth of the wolf's embrace, the story hadn't ended. It had only just begun. The night unfolded slowly over the forest, laying down shadows like blankets over the land. Stars blinked to life above the trees, but beneath the canopy it was all quiet. Too quiet. The she-wolf hadn't moved in hours. She lay curled tightly around a tiny bobcat cub, her breathing low and steady, but her eyes never closed. Every twitch of a branch, every rustle of a leaf, she noticed, but nothing came. The male hadn't returned, and still she waited. The cub was warmer now. Its limbs no longer shook. It had started making soft, suckling motions in its sleep, pressing its tiny mouth against the soft fur of its new protector. The she-wolf had nothing to give, no milk, no bloodline, but she let the cub try. She stayed still, only occasionally pressing her snout gently against its head to reassure it. There were no words in the wild, only presence. Far beyond the hollow, the path through the woods had been torn. Scratches on tree bark, drag marks in the dirt, but no blood, no body. The mountain lion had vanished back into the wilderness, and the male wolf's trail had grown faint, scattered like smoke. If he had survived, he was keeping his distance. If he hadn't, the forest would take him in silence. But the she-wolf didn't mourn. Not yet. She focused only on the cub. Every breath it took was an unspoken promise, a reason to keep waiting, to keep guarding. Dawn came without fanfare. It was a soft change in color first, black to deep blue, then a gentle flush of gold on the horizon. The first bird sang in cautious bursts. Somewhere far off, an elk called. Life returned slowly, as it always did. The she-wolf stood and stretched, one paw at a time, her muscles stiff from the cold and stillness. She nosed the cub again. It squirmed sleepily, then let out a hoarse, high-pitched cry. The sound was smaller than the day before, but stronger, clearer. She felt something stir inside her. Not instinct, not memory, attachment. She gently picked the cub up again, cradling it in her jaws as she stepped out into the morning light. The dew clung to her fur. Her breath came in soft puffs. And then she walked, slowly, deliberately, through the forest, deeper than she had gone before. Not to hide, but to find somewhere better, somewhere safer. Hours passed. The trees thickened. The air turned cool again. And finally, nestled between two ancient stumps and shielded by tall ferns, she stopped. The place was quiet, sheltered. It smelled of old earth and undisturbed moss. She laid the cub down gently, then began to dig. Not out of instinct to bury, but to shape. She carved a shallow nest into the ground with her paws, dragging leaves and twigs into a circle. It wasn't perfect, but it would be home. And then, without warning, she heard a sound, a soft, low whine. She turned her head sharply, ears pricked and froze. From the trees behind her, limping, ribs showing, coat ragged, the male wolf returned. His eyes met hers for only a moment. There was no joy in his face, no triumph, just exhaustion. But he had made it back. He stepped forward with care, each leg heavy. She met him halfway. They didn't touch, didn't howl, just stood near one another, breathing the same air. Then he looked past her, at the cub. She followed his gaze and watched as, from across the small clearing, he lay down on his side and rested his head on the moss. The cub squeaked again in that tiny, fragile voice, and the she-wolf stepped back just enough to let it explore. Slowly, the little bobcat dragged its body forward, still unsure on its legs, until it reached the male's chest. It collapsed there, face buried in the wolf's fur. The forest stood still for a moment. Something sacred had just happened. No one would witness it, but it was real. In the days that followed, they fell into rhythm. The male, despite his wounds, patrolled quietly nearby, scenting the air, marking the trees. The she-wolf stayed close to the cub, carrying it with her when needed, teaching it to climb small roots, to sniff at the wind. The cub began to follow. Its steps were clumsy. Its tail wagged awkwardly, but its eyes had opened now, golden like its mother's, and it watched everything, especially the wolves. Their movements, their stillness, the way they paused before stepping into clearings. It began to mimic them. Sometimes it tried to howl. The sound came out more like a squeak than a call, but the wolves didn't stop it. They watched, waited, listened. Each time, the cub grew bolder. It played with their tails. It slept between them. It began to trust them. But nature doesn't freeze in kindness. One afternoon, as the wind picked up and dark clouds gathered above, the she-wolf returned from a brief patrol to find the cub trembling beneath a bush. Its fur stood on end. Its body was rigid. She rushed forward, eyes darting, nose scanning, and then she saw it. A snare, metal buried under leaves, left by humans. The male wolf stood nearby, paw raised awkwardly, caught in the trap. The cub must have wandered too far. The male had followed, and stepped where he shouldn't have. He didn't cry out. He just looked at her, calm, pain simmering behind his eyes. The she-wolf froze only for a second. Then she moved. The she-wolf didn't hesitate. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. In one swift, calculated motion, she darted forward and crouched beside the male, her nose brushing against a twisted wire digging into his leg. His breathing was sharp, measured, but he didn't growl. He didn't flinch. He just looked at her with a calm that only came from pain he refused to show. The cub stayed frozen under the bush, its wide eyes locked on the scene. It didn't cry this time. It didn't whimper. But its tiny body shivered so violently. The leaves around it quaked. The trap was old, rusted, and half buried in dirt. A snare meant for something else. Maybe a fox, maybe a raccoon, but not this. The male's paw was caught between jagged steel teeth. Blood soaked the earth beneath it, pooling slowly, silently. The she-wolf sniffed the wound, then pressed her paw on the ground beside it as if anchoring him, telling him she was here. He wasn't alone. She didn't know how to fix this. She had no tools, no hands, no voice to call for help. But what she had was time, patience, and presence. She sat beside him as the light dimmed and the wind shifted, bringing with it the scent of rain. She would wait, but nature wasn't going to wait with her. The storm arrived faster than expected. Thunder rumbling low in the sky, trees swaying in protest. The cub whimpered and crawled deeper beneath the bush, its fur already wet from the first drops. The she-wolf turned her head toward it, then back to the male. She couldn't leave him. Not like this. Not now. Then she made a decision. She rose slowly, walked to the cub, picked it up once more by the scruff, and brought it closer. She placed the little body between herself and the injured male, nestling it against his chest, and lay her body over them both. She would shield them. The rain came in sheets, loud and merciless. Lightning flashed once, then again, illuminating their figures for brief, broken seconds. The she-wolf closed her eyes. The cub didn't cry, and the male breathed in slow, deliberate pulls, each one a quiet fight against the metal cutting into him. Hours passed like that, and then, just before dawn, the sound of something foreign crept into the forest. Boots, cracking twigs, low voices. Humans! The she-wolf's ears flicked back. Her muscles tightened. She rose immediately, placing herself between the cub and the sound. The male tried to lift himself too, but the pain anchored him. He let out a low, guttural exhale, a warning not of fear but of readiness. They didn't know what kind of humans these were. Hunters? Campers? Rescuers? The forest didn't answer. Then a beam of light, flashlight, cut through the branches and landed right on the snare. The humans froze. One knelt down slowly, eyes wide. "It's a wolf," he whispered, stunned. "But wait, is that a bobcat cub?" The wolves didn't move. They just watched. A second man moved closer. "He's caught bad. We need to free him." Slowly. They weren't threats. Their voices weren't sharp. Their steps weren't rushed. They would try to help. But the wolves didn't know that. All they knew was that their world had been invaded. The she-wolf growled low, not aggressive, but firm. A boundary. The cub, sensing the change in energy, pressed itself tighter against the male wolf's chest, its tiny body barely visible beneath his fur. One man raised both hands slowly. "We're not here to hurt you. Just want to get him out of the trap." Still, the wolves didn't move. But then something shifted. The male wolf turned his head toward the she-wolf and blinked once. Slowly, calmly. She understood. She backed away. Only a few steps, but enough to let the humans approach. She stayed close to the cub, shielding it still, but she trusted the space. It was the male signal. A surrender, not defeat, but a faith. The man reached forward, hands shaking, and began to work the trap open. It took time. Each creak of metal made the male wolf twitch, but he didn't bite, didn't pull. He just stared forward, steady, waiting. Finally, the trap loosened. With one final snap of rusted steel, the paw was free. The man stepped back quickly. "There," he whispered. "He's free." The male wolf didn't move right away. Blood soaked his leg, but the pressure was gone. Slowly, he lifted his paw and took a single step, then another. It hurt, but he was no longer trapped. He walked toward the she-wolf, limping, breathing hard, and nuzzled the cub. The she-wolf pressed against him in silence. The humans stood back, amazed, unsure what they were witnessing. "Should we take the cub?" one of them whispered. The other shook his head. "Would you?" There was no answer. The men turned, slowly, and disappeared into the trees, their lights fading behind them. And then the wolves were alone again. Rain had stopped. The sun rose behind heavy clouds. The air smelled of wet leaves and survival. The cub had fallen asleep, curled between the two wolves like a bridge made of fur and breath. For now, they had won. But the forest was never finished with its stories. There was more to come. The days that followed were quiet, but heavy. The male wolf's leg remained stiff, and though he walked, he did so with a limp that would likely never leave. Each step was a slow reminder of the cost of protection. But he never fell behind. He never showed pain in front of the cub. The cub was growing. Its legs had strengthened, its eyes now alert and curious. It followed the she-wolf everywhere, bounding awkwardly through the undergrowth, tripping on roots, chasing falling leaves. Sometimes it pounced at her tail or climbed her side while she rested, and always she let it. She never pushed it away. The male watched from a distance most days, lying in patches of sun or beneath trees where the wind moved gently. He had grown quieter since the trap. Not weak, just quieter, thoughtful, as if listening more to what the forest didn't say. They had become a pack, not by blood, not by tradition, but by choice, by circumstance, by something stronger than instinct. One morning, the cub disappeared. It wasn't unusual at first. It had started exploring more, sometimes hiding under logs or inside bushes to test its stealth. But this time, when the she-wolf called softly, her whine short and sharp, there was no answer. She looked to the male. He was already standing. The two wolves began to search. circling the small territory they carved into their own, noses to the ground, eyes scanning shadows. Then came the scent. Not blood, not the cub, something else. Humans. And smoke. They followed the smell to a slope near the riverbank, where the trees thinned. Below, not far from the water, was a small camp, 2 tents, a fire pit, a cooler, and near the edge of it, inside a wire enclosure, a crate. The cub was inside. It pawed at the edges, confused, nose pressed against the bars. A soft whine escaped its throat, barely audible over the wind. The she-wolf froze. She had seen traps before, but not like this. This wasn't rusted wire on the ground. This was planned. Clean. Cold. The male stepped forward, but his limp slowed him. She stopped him with a glance. This wasn't something they could charge into. They waited until nightfall. Humans! The she-wolf's ears flicked back. Her muscles tightened. She rose immediately, placing herself between the cub and the sound. The male tried to lift himself too, but the pain anchored him. He let out a low, guttural exhale, a warning, not of fear, but of readiness. They didn't know what kind of humans these were. Hunters? Campers? Rescuers? The forest didn't answer. Then a beam of light, flashlight, cut through the branches and landed right on the snare. The humans froze. One knelt down slowly, eyes wide. "It's a wolf," he whispered, stunned. "But wait, is that a bobcat cub?" The wolves didn't move. They just watched. A second man moved closer. "He's caught bad. We need to free him." Slowly. They weren't threats. Their voices weren't sharp. Their steps weren't rushed. They were trying to help. But the wolves didn't know that. All they knew was that their world had been invaded. The she-wolf growled low, not aggressive, but firm, a boundary. The cub, sensing the change in energy, pressed itself tighter against the male wolf's chest, its tiny body barely visible beneath his fur. One man raised both hands slowly. "We're not here to hurt you. Just want to get him out of the trap." Still, the wolves didn't move. But then something shifted. The male wolf turned his head toward the she-wolf and blinked once, slowly, calmly. She understood. She backed away. Only a few steps, but enough to let the humans approach. She stayed close to the cub, shielding it still, but she trusted the space. It was the male signal. A surrender, not a defeat, but a faith. The man reached forward, hand shaking, and began to work the trap open. It took time. Each creak of metal made the male wolf twitch, but he didn't bite, didn't pull. He just stared forward, steady, waiting. Finally, the trap loosened. With one final snap of rusted steel, the paw was free. The man stepped back quickly. "There," he whispered. "He's free." The male wolf didn't move right away. Blood soaked his leg, but the pressure was gone. Slowly, he lifted his paw and took a single step. Then another. It hurt, but he was no longer trapped. He walked toward the she-wolf, limping, breathing hard, and nuzzled the cub. The she-wolf pressed against him in silence. The humans stood back, amazed, unsure what they were witnessing. "Should we take the cub?" One of them whispered. The other shook his head. "Would you?" There was no answer. The men turned, slowly, and disappeared into trees, their lights fading behind them. And then the wolves were alone again. Rain had stopped. The sun rose behind heavy clouds. The air smelled of wet leaves and survival. The cub had fallen asleep, curled between the two wolves like a bridge made of fur and breath. For now, they had won. But the forest was never finished with its stories. There was more to come. The days that followed were quiet, but heavy. The male wolf's leg remained stiff, and though he walked, he did so with a limp that would likely never leave. Each step was a slow reminder of the cost of protection, but he never fell behind. He never showed pain in front of the cub. The cub was growing. Its legs had strengthened, its eyes now alert and curious. It followed the she-wolf everywhere, bounding awkwardly through the undergrowth, tripping on roots, chasing falling leaves. Sometimes it pounced at her tail or climbed her side while she rested, and always she let it. She never pushed it away. The male watched from a distance most days, lie in patches of sun or beneath trees where the wind moved gently. He had grown quieter since the trap. Not weak, just quieter. Thoughtful, as if listening more to what the forest didn't say. They had become a pack. Not by blood, not by tradition, but by choice. By circumstance. By something stronger than instinct. One morning, the cub disappeared. It wasn't unusual at first. It had started exploring more, sometimes hiding under logs or inside bushes to test its stealth. But this time, when the she-wolf called softly, her whine short and sharp, there was no answer. She looked to the male. He was already standing. The two wolves began to search, circling the small territory they'd carved into their own, noses to the ground, eyes scanning shadows. Then came the scent. Not blood, not the cub, something else. Humans and smoke. They followed the smell to a slope near the riverbank where the trees thinned. Below, not far from the water, was a small camp, 2 tents, a fire pit, a cooler, and near the edge of it, inside a wire enclosure, a crate. The cub was inside. It pawed at the edges, confused, nose pressed against the bars. A soft whine escaped its throat, barely audible over the wind. The she-wolf froze. She had seen traps before, but not like this. This wasn't rusted wire on the ground. This was planned, clean, cold. The male stepped forward, but his limp slowed him. She stopped him with a glance. This wasn't something they could charge into. They waited until nightfall. The camp went quiet. The humans disappeared into the tents. The fire burned low. Only the faint crackle of embers and the cub's occasional, restless movement broke the silence. The wolves approached from the shadows, low and slow, eyes fixed on the crate. The she-wolf reached it first. The cub saw her and let out a chirp-like cry, lifting its paw through the bars. She pressed her nose against it gently, breathing the scent in, checking for harm. No blood, no injuries, just fear. She circled the crate once, searching for a way to open it, but it was locked tight. Heavy. The male came beside her. Together, they tested it. Pushed, pulled, but it didn't move. Not enough. Then the male did something unexpected. He backed up. He looked once at the she-wolf, and then he charged the side of the crate with everything he had. The crash was loud. Metal groaned. Inside, the cub cried out in surprise. From the tents, movement, voices, flashlights. They were coming. The she-wolf growled low, biting at the side of the crate. The male charged again. The latch bent. The door popped open. The cub scrambled out, running blindly into the she-wolf's chest. She turned instantly, grabbing it by the scruff, and bolted for the trees. The male followed, limping but fast, his body burning with effort. Behind them, flashlights swept the clearing. One man shouted, "There! Something's running." But it was too late. The forest swallowed them whole. Back in the safety of the hollow, the she-wolf laid the cub down gently. The male collapsed beside them, chest heaving. The cub crawled to him immediately, nestling against his side. The she-wolf curled around them both, her heart still thundering. For hours they didn't move. The wind passed through the trees like a quiet applause. That night, the cub didn't sleep. It sat between them, eyes wide open, watching the stars of branches above. Its body pressed tightly between the two wolves. Its breathing slow. Awake, aware. Something had changed. Not just in the cub, in them all. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was something deeper. A bond written in risk, in sacrifice, an instinct turned into love. And as the stars shifted slowly overhead, the three of them stayed together in silence, holding the last of the night like a secret between them. Morning was still far away, but they knew now they would face it together. The forest greeted the morning not with light, but with stillness. A soft mist hovered just above the ground, catching the first rays of sun that slipped between the branches. Every blade of grass sparkled with dew. Every sound, the rustling of leaves, the distant flutter of wings, felt like it belonged to something sacred. The cub rose first. It stepped carefully over the she-wolf's tail, then padded toward the clearing. Its movements had changed. Less clumsy, more certain. Its fur had filled out, thicker now, patterned with faint stripes. Its paws no longer wobbled beneath it. And in its eyes, still golden like its mother's, was something that hadn't been there before. Quiet confidence. Behind it, the she-wolf stirred. She watched in silence as the cub stood tall near the ferns, sniffing the wind. The male wolf didn't move, but his eyes opened slowly. His limp had grown more noticeable. Each day his strength waned just slightly. He'd begun staying behind more often, watching rather than leading. But he was there. He was always there. The cub turned to look at both of them, as if checking that they were still watching, still close. They were. In the weeks that had passed since the crate in the camp, the wolves had shifted territory, moved deeper into the woods, farther from human scent. The hollow had been replaced with a new den beneath an ancient cedar tree. Its roots curled like arms around the nest they had made. There was no more danger here, at least not for now. The cub had started a hunt, not on its own yet, but beside the she-wolf, learning the silent language of the forest, when to pause, when to stalk, when to strike. It was awkward but persistent, curious, and, above all, careful. It watched everything. It remembered. One morning, a rabbit darted through the underbrush. The she-wolf lunged, but stopped short. She had done it on purpose. She turned to the cub, giving it space. The cub chased. It missed, of course, but it chased well. And when it returned, panting, tail twitching, the male wolf lifted his head from the ground and made a small, low exhale. Not quite a sound. More like a breath of pride. It wasn't just the cub that had grown. Something in the wolves had changed, too. They had learned to make space for something that didn't belong, and now couldn't be separated. Not by blood, not by species, not even by instinct. The cub was theirs. But nature is never static. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and painted the sky in burning orange, the she-wolf stood alone near the edge of the meadow. She was still for a long time, watching, listening. The wind carried nothing but the smell of pine and wet bark. But she knew the time was coming. The cub was growing into something different. It still played, still followed, but it also climbed now, higher into trees, slipped between rocks where wolves never went. It had started spending parts of the day alone, only returning at dusk with new scents on its coat, signs of independence. And the wolves let it, because they knew that love, real love, doesn't mean keeping. It means preparing to let go. One night, as the stars blinked above and the den was quiet, the cub rose. It walked to the male wolf, pressing its head against his chest, then to the she-wolf, who licked its ears softly, once. No words, no sounds. It turned and walked into the forest, not out of pain, but purpose. They didn't follow. They watched until the last glimmer of its striped back vanished into the shadows. Then they lay down together, side by side, eyes open, chests rising and falling in the same slow rhythm. The days that followed were emptier, but not hollow. Sometimes, in the distance, they heard a faint rustle, or found a half-eaten rabbit left at the edge of the den. Sometimes they spotted paw prints that didn't match their own. And sometimes, just for a moment, they thought they saw golden eyes watching from behind a bush. But they never chased. They just let the forest move, because they had done what few creatures ever do. They had rewritten the story, from predator and prey to family. And somewhere deep in the forest, under the same stars, the bobcat cub stood alone, stronger, wiser, but never lost. It would never be lost again, because once you are truly loved, even in the wild, you carry that with you forever.